The moment Denzel Washington stepped onto the brightly lit stage of The View, the entire atmosphere shifted as though the studio itself straightened its posture. Even through the cameras, viewers could feel that signature presence, calm, centered, yet powerful enough to command the space without a word. The audience applauded longer than usual, and even the hosts who prided themselves on composure couldn't hide their excitement. But beneath that polished television energy, a faint current of tension was already forming, subtle and easy to miss, at least until it wasn't. The conversation began harmlessly enough. Denzel shared stories from his new film, anecdotes from his early career, and reflections that revealed the depth of his thinking. The other hosts listened intently, nodding and laughing in the right places, clearly aware they were sitting across from a Hollywood icon. But Joy Behar, known for her sharp tongue and insistence on her own perspective, seemed impatient from the start. She interjected occasionally with jokes that didn't quite land, and though Denzel responded politely, her persistence grew more noticeable. When the discussion shifted to topics like personal discipline, family values, and the importance of mentorship, subjects Denzel has always spoken about with conviction, Joy's expression tightened. She leaned forward, eagerness in her eyes not to understand, but to challenge. The first interruption was subtle, a small correction on a detail. Denzel brushed it off with grace. The second was more pointed, questioning whether his views were realistic in today's world. Again, he answered calmly, making room for debate. But Joy kept pressing, her tone edging from playful disagreement into something resembling mockery. Still, Denzel held his composure. He had sat in countless interviews, endured heated panels, and faced tougher critics. But the moment Joy made a snide remark about his old-fashioned thinking, the energy on the set changed completely. Denzel paused mid-sentence, the silence he allowed hanging heavier than any argument. He set his microphone down, not aggressively, just deliberately enough to make everyone freeze. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that they had stepped into a moment no one had planned for. Then he spoke, not loudly, but with the measured authority of someone who didn't need volume to dominate a room. "Joy," he said, looking her straight in the eyes, "you're crossing the line. You didn't invite me here to listen. You invited me to mock what matters to me." His voice remained calm, almost gentle, but the impact landed like a punch. Joy blinked rapidly, caught off guard. The audience murmured in shock. The cameras stayed trained on Denzel, as though drawn to the sheer control radiating from him. Joy attempted to recover with a laugh, waving her hand dismissively, but the viewers could see the discomfort in her eyes. When she tried to interrupt again, Denzel simply raised a hand, not to silence her rudely, but to reclaim the conversation with unmistakable dignity. He added, "A real conversation requires respect. Otherwise, we're not talking, we're just making noise." The audience erupted into applause, some even rising to their feet. Producers signaled security to stand by, sensing Joy's frustration building. Within seconds, 2 staff members moved to the edge of the stage. Joy pushed her chair back, visibly embarrassed, but when she attempted to argue again, security gently motioned for her to step backstage. The escort wasn't dramatic or forceful, it was quiet, controlled, almost symbolic. The rest of the panel sat in stunned silence as she disappeared from view. Denzel, unbothered, adjusted his jacket, offered a polite smile, and said, "Now, where were we?" The audience burst into laughter and applause, relieved by his poise. Within minutes, clips from audience members' phones were already circulating online. The moment spread like wildfire, sparking debates on respect, professionalism, and the power of staying calm under pressure. And by the end of the day, one thing was clear: Denzel Washington didn't just dominate the interview, he redefined it. The fallout from the moment Joy Behar was escorted off The View didn't just end when she disappeared backstage. In fact, the energy inside the studio transformed in a way no producer could have predicted. The audience, still processing the tension, leaned forward in their seats, some whispering in disbelief, others wide-eyed as though they had just witnessed a once-in-a-lifetime collision of personalities. Denzel Washington sat calmly at the table, unshaken, as if the storm that had just passed hadn't brushed him at all. His presence radiated the same unmovable steadiness that defined his most iconic roles, but this time it wasn't scripted, it was real. The remaining co-hosts scrambled to regain control of the segment, but for several seconds the silence was almost surreal. Anna tried to speak, stumbled over her words, then cleared her throat. Sunny glanced nervously toward the edge of the stage where Joy had exited, as though expecting her to march back in. Whoopi, usually the anchor during chaos, simply sighed, a long, knowing sigh, before turning to Denzel with a half-smile that acknowledged both the awkwardness and the weight of what had happened. "Well, she finally managed, that was something." Denzel responded with a gentle chuckle, not mocking, not triumphant, but confident. "It's all right," he said. "Sometimes conversations get passionate, but respect should never be optional." The audience applauded again, this time not out of shock but admiration. They could feel the sincerity in his words. He wasn't trying to embarrass Joy or escalate the conflict. He was simply drawing a line, a boundary that demanded dignity even in disagreement. As producers subtly communicated through earpieces and hand signals, the hosts attempted to steer back into the interview, asking Denzel about his upbringing, discipline, mentors, and the values he learned from his parents. The shift in topic allowed the atmosphere to soften. Denzel spoke with the depth and wisdom he's known for, illustrating stories from his youth, his early struggles, and the spiritual grounding that shaped him. Every word seemed to draw the room into a calmer rhythm, as though he were smoothing out the very air tensions had twisted minutes earlier. But even as the discussion flowed, the underlying buzz of what had happened continued vibrating through the set. Audience members couldn't stop sneaking glances at the place Joy once sat. Crew members moved discreetly, communicating about whether to continue the show as planned or prepare for emergency adjustments. Someone backstage was undoubtedly checking social media, because clips of the confrontation were already exploding online. Thousands of comments appeared within minutes. Shock, support, criticism, disbelief, the digital world was spiraling. Meanwhile, on set, Denzel remained composed, answering questions with the same steady cadence while displaying empathy even toward Joy. "She's passionate," he said at one point. "We all are in our own ways. But sometimes passion needs to pause for perspective." That simple line resonated deeply. The audience applauded again, the hosts nodded, and for the first time since the incident, the tension fully dissolved. After the segment ended, the show cut to a commercial break. But the studio was still humming with adrenaline. Several audience members whispered excitedly about the unprecedented moment they had just witnessed. Crew members rushed around, phones buzzing non-stop. One of the co-hosts leaned toward Denzel privately, clearly thanking him for handling everything with such grace. He simply smiled and replied, "Life teaches us patience. TV just tests it." Within an hour of filming, news outlets began picking up the story. Commentators dissected every word, body movement, and reaction. Fans praised Denzel's restraint, calling it an example of masterclass composure. Others debated Joy's comments and whether lines had indeed been crossed. But regardless of the stance, everyone agreed that the moment would go down as one of the most surprising and talked about incidents in daytime television history. And while Joy eventually returned later in the show, visibly calmer and noticeably quieter, the dynamic had shifted. The audience watched her differently. The co-hosts approached topics more cautiously. And Denzel, he remained exactly as he had been from the start, grounded, respectful, and unshakably in control, proving once again why few can command a room like he does. Even after the cameras stopped rolling and the audience began to exit the studio, the atmosphere behind the scenes remained thick with the echoes of what had happened. The confrontation between Denzel Washington and Joy Behar didn't just fade once the show ended, it followed every staff member, producer, and co-host like an invisible storm cloud they were still trying to understand. In the dressing rooms, hallways, and production offices, whispers traveled quickly, mixed with disbelief, curiosity, and a level of tension that rarely lingered after an episode of The View. People spoke in hushed voices, glancing around as if afraid Joy might suddenly appear and reignite the fire. Denzel, however, carried none of the tension with him. He moved through the backstage corridors with the same quiet dignity he had shown on air, greeting crew members respectfully, thanking the stagehands, and offering small smiles that reassured everyone he wasn't shaken. He showed no sign of frustration, no bitterness, no smug satisfaction, just that calm, centered presence that seemed to anchor the space around him. To the surprise of a few producers, he even asked if Joy was all right, showing genuine concern rather than irritation. His natural humility disarmed those who expected a celebrity to walk out in anger or complain to management. Meanwhile, Joy sat in her dressing room surrounded by a few producers, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and stubborn defiance. She replayed the incident again and again, trying to justify her words while also recognizing the weight of the backlash already forming online. She knew Denzel commanded respect on a level few entertainers ever reached. Challenging him had been risky, crossing the line had been disastrous. She claimed she had merely been joking, but even she knew the sarcasm had been sharper than she intended. The producers tried to soothe her, but the tension in the room was palpable. By the time Joy finally emerged, the hallways had already quieted, and several staff members avoided eye contact, unsure whether to acknowledge her or step aside. The co-hosts offered her polite nods but remained cautious, sensing she wasn't ready to talk. She went straight to the executive office, hoping to defend herself before the internet turned the narrative into something she couldn't control. But even there, she found it difficult to balance her pride with the reality of what had happened. The executives listened carefully, then gently reminded her that boundaries mattered, even when debates grew passionate. Outside the studio, reporters were already gathering, asking questions as if a major political scandal had unfolded. Some fans defended Joy, arguing she was simply being outspoken. Many more sided with Denzel, praising the grace and firmness he had displayed. Memes, video clips, and commentary spread across platforms. It wasn't just a trending moment, it had become a cultural flashpoint, a reminder of how easily respectful dialogue can shift into confrontation and how powerful calm authority can be when used wisely. Denzel finally left the building surrounded not by security but by admiring staff. A few thanked him for handling the situation with such restraint. He nodded humbly, saying only, "Respect goes both ways. I just gave what I asked for." His car drove off as cameras flashed along the sidewalk, capturing the composed image of a man who had weathered a storm without raising his voice. Joy exited later, wearing sunglasses and keeping her head low as she navigated through reporters. She offered no comments, no explanations, only a tight smile that revealed she understood the magnitude of what had unfolded. She knew the headlines would be brutal, and the public reactions even more so. Back inside, the production team gathered to debrief, their discussion circling around one theme: how a moment of disrespect had turned into a viral lesson in poise. Some admitted they had never seen anything like it. Others wondered how they would top this episode. Yet all agreed on one thing: Denzel's reaction didn't just calm the chaos, it redefined it. And while the show would continue, this moment would linger long after, becoming a point of reference for future episodes, future guests, and future debates about the balance between passion and professionalism.